Okay, so first of all, thank you everybody for attending the session this morning. Some of you will have responded to an email I've sent you directly, and others through a LinkedIn invite. So thank you for responding. I just wanted to do a quick introduction. Who is on the call from Spec Ops? It's myself, Karen Bowen, and I'm the UK&I account manager, and my colleague Darren James, who's our product specialist. He's on the webinar and we'll be doing most of the presentation over the next 20 minutes or so. The reason for setting up the NHS webinar, Blocking Weak Passwords in Healthcare, is because we work with a large number of NHS hospitals and healthcare trusts, and we understand from the current NHS policies that weak passwords are still being used. Darren will run through the current NHS password policies and discuss how to overcome some of those issues. I'll quickly do or provide an overview of Spec Ops to help you understand. We have a great number of years and expertise in this subject. So we're a privately owned corporation. We're founded in 2001. So, we're racking up the years now. More than 3,000 customers in 50 countries. We provide desktop management and password management. Our HQ is in Sweden. So that's all of our R&D team, marketing, HR, directors, etc. We have a local presence within the United Kingdom, United States and Canada, and we build on existing infrastructure via AD. If I just wanted to say that this is quite an open session really, but if you would like to ask any questions as Darren runs through the presentation, please type them and I'll collate them and probably just ask them all at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to Darren.
Thank you very much, Karen. So let's have a look at the NHS password policy guidance that's available today. So minimum of 8 characters, mustn't contain a dictionary word, 2 uppercase, 2 lowercase, 2 numbers and 2 special characters that expires every 90 days. So unfortunately, this policy, it's impossible to enforce currently within Active Directory. And within many systems out there at the moment. And also, it really follows the kind of old doctrine where people are going along the route of enforcing complex passwords. So something that's hard for the user to manage and hard for them to remember. And so, of course, it's kind of anti-security in the end. They end up writing it down on a Post-it note and sticking it under their underneath their keyboard or around their monitor or whatever it might be. So Microsoft a few years ago, if you like to flick to the next slide for me, Karen, did a bit of research.
Sorry.
Thank you. And this was back in 2016, and it's subsequently been backed up by the NCSC, which is used to be known as GCHQ, and the CESG. And also the Cyber Essential Scheme and NIST over in the States. So they've all come up with this new way of thinking around what a password policy should look like. And the general theme of that, just go back again for me again, Karen. The general theme of that is to remove the burden from the users and instead place it on the system. So that's things like, reducing complexity and so on and so forth. And then also allowing the users to keep their longer and stronger potentially passwords for longer periods of time as well. So in some cases they are suggesting remove expiry, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So what are the common types of password attacks that we see out there? So you should obviously avoid common, easily guessable and obviously change default passwords. So don't use words like password1 with a capital P and QWERTY123 exclamation mark, anything like that. But also try and avoid reusing passwords. So if you think, oh, I've got a really great password that I use for work, don't use it on your Twitter account and Facebook account and LinkedIn account and Instagram account. Try and have different passwords for each one of those, because it only takes one of those other systems to become compromised, and they've got all of the keys to the kingdom. They can log in with your account with that same password on all of the other systems that you access. Of course, there are huge lists available from all of these leaks. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Have I Been Pwned, a website run by a another security expert called Troy Hunt, and he's got a compiled list of over 550 million leaked passwords, and as well as a good number of email addresses that have been also compromised at the same time. But these lists are often used to perform things like credential stuffing and brute force attacks. So yeah, don't be aware of that as well. And then there's obvious things like keylogging, which is very difficult to protect against. You can spend £20 on a keylogger from eBay, plug it into the USB port between your keyboard and the computer, and it will log any key entries. So it doesn't really matter if you've got a super strong, really long password, a keylogger is going to protect that. The only really way you can get around keyloggers is by introducing things like MFA, or if maybe you block the USB ports on some of your systems. But that's always going to be a problem. So again, physical security is really important there. Phishing attacks, again, very difficult to protect yourself against. Obviously, if you've got good spam filters in place on your mail servers or mail filters, that's good. But also, really, it comes down to education. Someone can construct a perfectly good email asking someone to enter their credentials into a website, and it might look like portal.office.com, Office 365, or any other system that you may use. And unless you can spot those telltale signs, it's very difficult to guard against phishing. So it's kind of education more than anything else when it's phishing attacks. And then finally, just shoulder surfing. So, if you've got a fairly short password, it's pretty easy for me to just sit next to you, glance over your shoulder, and see what that password is. So all of these things we have to think about and try and mitigate against. So what's Microsoft's advice? So we've got a list of 8 points, or 7 points, I should say here. Let's take a look at each one of those in detail. So password length. So Microsoft's advice was a little bit strange as far as this was concerned from our perspective. They say that longer passwords aren't stronger. Maintain an 8-character minimum. Well, that's just not the case, is it really? Longer is stronger. It's basically maths. I mean, I think their thought was, it doesn't prevent against keylogging or phishing attacks. That's absolutely right. But the longer the password, the harder it is. It's going to be to crack. The less likely it's going to that it's going to show up on some of these generic lists that are already out there. So and we always encourage people to try and make use of passphrases. So rather than just a long string of random text, come up with 3 words that mean something to you, with maybe 6 characters in each of those words and spaces between those words. And of course, if you've got 3 words, 6 characters, 2 white spaces, that's 20 characters in length. That's a pretty good, strong passphrase. So don't use things like the first line of a. Just go back again for me, Karen. Don't use things like the first line of a song, or their favorite film, or a line of a poem or anything like that. But if it's 3 random words, then that means something to you but nothing to anybody else, that's perfect. And in fact, so this was recently backed up by the NCSC, so the National Cyber Security Centre. They had a blog post on there saying #ThinkRandom, and we've got a link to that if you want to look further into that. But yeah, passphrases longer than 15 characters, ideally 20 characters, are perfect in this respect. Okay, so next thing is complexity. So eliminate character composition and use system controls. Well, I think a generalized approach to these sorts of things is never good. There are lots and lots of different types of user within an organization. You've got your frontline staff, doctors and nurses that are treating patients. They have access to computers that may be open on a ward. They also need fast access, obviously, to those. Then maybe we should look at reducing complexity and having MFA for those sorts of devices. But in your back-end environments, there may be people that have access to other forms of sensitive information, whether it be the IT admins or service accounts or HR users or finance. They've all got access to these different systems that may have different levels of sensitivity. And so really you should look at having a potentially separate policies for those people. Not one policy doesn't suit everybody. There are different user groups and environments and constituencies that really should have different potential password policies. And some of those may include complex passwords, some of them may not. It's true that the more character types that you have, the harder it will be to crack, but it will also make it harder to remember. And really, IT admins and users with access to this sorts of sensitive information should be educated or should already understand the need for strong passwords. The other thing with complexity is that you shouldn't always, sometimes you need to look at what you're synchronizing your passwords to. So sometimes you have some when you have single sign-on solutions, they may synchronize the password from Active Directory to a third-party system. If you switch complexity off in your Active Directory, that may not be good enough for the system that you're now synchronizing to. And so that may break those systems. So again, you need to make sure that you've got a common policy across all of those systems. And then also complexity,
sorry, Darren.
to move on. Also complexity isn't just about, uppercase, lowercase digits and special characters. It's all about putting an end to sort of bad behaviors as well. So particularly when you're pushing towards longer passwords, you should remove things like using consecutive identical characters, or maybe even blocking the use of numbers at the beginning of it or the end of a password, because that's generally where people put them. So although less complex passwords are easier to crack and more susceptible to brute force attacks, you've got to, it's always got to be treated, your user groups have got to be treated with respect, and you've got to apply the right policy to the right people at the right time to get a good solution across your environment. Okay, so password expiry. Now this is a little bit of a contentious issue, I think. They actually state that you should remove password expiry. But on the other hand, they're also saying, but don't forget, for IT admins, our advice is to expire it every 30 to 45 days. So you've got two conflicting pieces of advice coming from the same location. Again, I would say you need to take a segmented approach. Again, you need to look at these user groups and look at the level of sensitivity of the data that those users access. So when you've got, and also that little post-it note that we've got up on the top of this slide here, it takes an average of 200 days before recognizing a breach. So if you remove the expiry on a password and that password becomes compromised, you only really know about it if the hacker does something malicious with that user's account immediately. But that's not always the case. A hacker may sit there, monitor people's emails, have access to that system, and go completely undetected. And as I say, an average of 200. If you look at the Yahoo hack, which happened a couple of years ago, it took them 2 years to figure out that they'd had their admin passwords compromised. So unless you've got anything in place that can detect unusual logins, then that is a very difficult. I think that's bad advice to give out to your users. You should always have some kind of expiry, again, depending on the level of security or level of sensitivity that those users should access, or data that those users access. So yes, vary it across different groups. Of course, common passwords, ban all known linked passwords is a great thing to do. You should always have a password list or a banned password list that relates to your organization. So if I work for St Mary's Hospital, for instance, St Mary's should be the word at the top of my list that I'm going to block, and then all of the ward names and departments underneath that goes without saying. And then I should look at the surrounding area where my towns and villages are, where my staff may live. I should block those sorts of words. sports teams, all of that sort of thing should be in my common list, but also all of the generic lists that you see out there. And it's very easy. We've talked about the Have I Been Pwned site a few minutes ago with 550 million passwords. It's very easy to say that, but again, you have to think about the size of data that you've got. So look for solutions that that maintain those databases for you. So you know, rather than handling 550 million passwords, which is about a 30, 40 gigabyte database internally, and trying to keep that up to date, maybe look at outsourcing that dictionary, that global dictionary problem, to somebody else. So yes, it's very important to block those leaked passwords. Very important to block words that are obviously related to your organization as well. So we agree with those findings. And of course, all of this goes along with education. It's no good just firing out a password policy and hoping for the best, because all it will do is generate a bunch of calls back to the service desk. Why can't I use password 1 with a capital P as my password, and you know, St Mary's 1 with a capital S and as my password? So you know, you have to have some sort of education. Now, a lot of this is also in the media these days. Whenever there's a leak, you know, I think the general public are becoming more and more aware of the problems and more aware of leaks. We hear about all of these, you know, privacy issues and data protection issues. So it's becoming more of a subject that's on people's minds. So I think it's less of a problem than it used to be, but still you need to educate people, especially if you want to encourage them to go to passphrases. As I was talking earlier about having 3 random words that mean something to them and nothing to anybody else, explaining that to people, how that works, why that's better than password 1 with a capital B, I think is always a good place to start. And yes, you know, make sure you use it as a part of your IT security policy. And of course, multi-factor authentication, that's the kind of golden chalice. That's where we want to get to. Unfortunately, that's not always easy for people to implement, whether it's smart cards or other factors like Touch ID or Face ID or Google Authenticator. It's not always easy to integrate those with existing systems. You may just be stuck with a password as the only form of authenticating your users. But if you can use it, obviously switch it on. It's a good thing. And of course, if you've got systems like self-service password reset systems, for instance, make sure that they support strong multi-factor authentication services. Don't look at things, or you know, look at things other than security questions, because it's quite easy for me today to you know, find out what somebody's mother's maiden name was, or the first car they ever bought, or the name of their first school teacher. I can just look them up on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter and find that sort of information out. So try and avoid secret questions and use these more modern authentication factors like Touch ID or Face ID or Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, those sorts of things instead. Okay then. So yeah, our advice: use passphrases. Longer is stronger. It's maths, as it says on the slide. Take a segmented approach with password complexity. So look at your user groups, apply them, apply the right policy to the right people. Again, same thing with expiry of passwords. Don't just set them to never expire. I don't believe that is good advice at all. You should always have some sort of expiry, even if it's a year. And obviously for admin accounts and sensitive accounts, they should be shorter. When you've got things like PCI compliance, so the payment card industry, probably not going to affect too many people in the NHS. But you know, there's no wiggle room as far as that's concerned. It has to be 90 days. So look at your different user groups and apply the right expiry policy to those people. Obviously, ban common passwords, update the lists frequently. Don't just stick with one list, because these passwords do get compromised on a regular basis. Maybe go with a third-party service that can maintain that list for you. That's obviously a good piece of advice. And education, always educate your users on what's a good password and what's a bad password and what compliance and how they're responsible for maintaining that password. Don't share it with your colleagues. Don't write it down on a piece of paper. It's very important that they're aware of that. And of course, use MFA whenever you possibly can. It's not there yet, but obviously any new systems that you try to introduce, make sure they have good MFA options available. And I think that's about it. So I hope that was useful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the box, and hopefully Karen can read them to you, and I'll be able to answer them.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. A couple of them were duplicated, so I've just tried to pull them together. Are there usability issues when blocking passwords?
When blocking passwords, yes, obviously there are. So if I'm asked to change my password and I type in password 1 with a capital P, then obviously that's going to be rejected. So I've then got to come up with a password that does match the policy. And again, this all goes around the discussion that we had around education. So don't just say, this is your password policy, get on with it. Explain to users what we expect them to set as a password, or ideally a passphrase, and tell them that you're going to block words that are related to your organization, and you're going to block silly words like password and let me in and welcome. They're going to be obvious ones. And also, tell them don't try and cheat the system by padding out your password with a bunch of ones on the end, because we're going to block consecutive identical characters. Be sensible. Go educate your users, and then those usability problems should vanish.
Okay. Do you think passwords will ever be replaced?
I'd like to say yes, but unfortunately, a password is the simplest way that a developer can add security to a system. And unless you've got a kind of a unified approach, with like a single sign-on platform that supports MFA, it's very, very difficult to say that they're ever going to go. I think things will get better. I think as these problems, as the problems are highlighted, as IT security becomes more and more a part of everybody's daily lives, which it is already. I think things like sending a text message to your user's phone, or using things like Touch ID and Face ID when you access your bank, they're all very, very important steps to try and removing passwords. But it's having access to that hardware, that additional hardware, that additional layer. Not everybody's got a smartphone, so a password is your kind of lowest common denominator. So I think it's going to be around for a good long while to come. I think IBM back in 2007, rang the death knell for passwords. Passwords will be gone in the next 5 years. And of course, here we are in 2019, and they're still going strong. So yeah, we need to make the best of it, unfortunately, until we've all got access to the smartphones that are able to provide us with a good MFA solution. But I think that's still going to be a while yet.
Okay, right, I've got 2 more questions. How do users react when they can no longer use common passwords?
Again, it's very similar to the first question you asked,
Yeah.
really, the usability issue. So it's all about education. No, the reaction is normally one of frustration. But again, if you use it alongside, again, something like a self-service password reset system, which explains to the user what they've done is wrong as they're typing it in, maybe turns red dots to green dots or red dots to green ticks as they type it in, that can go a long way to helping the user choose the right password. But at the end of the day, it's all about education. It really is.
Last one, I think. Securing passwords is important, but how can I convince upper management?
Well, I think just show them all the stories in the news where people have been fined at best, thrown in jail at worst for data protection leaks. These data protection leaks, you know, obviously you've got some things where people leave laptops on trains, but other times that their passwords, that their users' passwords have been compromised and patient data has been leaked or customer data has been leaked. And then they are ultimately responsible for the protection of your customers, your users, your patients, whoever it may be. So it's a big thing. It's going to cost money at the end of the day, as well as in the embarrassment factor at the very least. But it'll actually cost money, potentially jobs, and potentially prison time. So yeah, it's a big risk, and it needs to be managed. It can't be ignored.
Okay. Well, I think I've tried to put all of those questions into, you know, kind of combine them. I think that's probably all the questions that we have. So I just suppose I would end it with saying thank you very much to Darren. Thank you for running through your presentation, and thank you everybody for attending. I hope you found the session useful, and we will get the recording out to you over the next day or so.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
And of course, if there's anything, if you need to contact us, if you have any other questions that you don't want to raise in a public forum, and you'd like to speak to us personally, then please feel free to reach out and contact us directly.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much, Darren. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Darren.